Imagine a city so arrogant, so blind to the truth, that rejected 3 messengers sent by Allah.
Silence them, or we will stone you!
And killed the man who defended them. A city where the people laughed as they stoned a righteous man to death, a man whose only crime was calling them to worship the one true God.
Kill him! Crush the traitor!
And in return, Allah didn't send armies. He didn't send floods or fire.
Who can destroy us?
Just one scream from the heavens, and they were gone, erased, silenced forever. Their bodies frozen mid-laughter, their hearts stopped mid-beat. This is not a fairy tale. This is Surah Yasin. This is the story of the people of the town Ashab al-Qaryah, and their fate is a warning that echoes through time to this very day. Before we begin, send peace upon Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by typing "Salz" in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's begin. Long ago, in a time lost to history, there stood a city whose name the Quran deliberately leaves unspoken. Some scholars say it was Antioch, that ancient jewel on the banks of the Orontes River. Others say the name doesn't matter because what happened there could happen anywhere. What matters is what the people became. Picture this: a city blessed with fertile lands, flowing water, and prosperous trade routes. But beneath its beautiful exterior, darkness festered like a wound. The ruler of this city was a man drunk on power, a tyrant who saw his people not as souls to shepherd, but as slaves to exploit. His name has been forgotten by time, but his cruelty has not. He sat on a golden throne, surrounded by sycophants and flatterers, who fed his ego while he drained the lifeblood of his kingdom. Every week, his tax collectors would sweep through the streets like vultures, taking half of what the merchants earned, half of what the farmers harvested, half of what the widows saved. The people worked until their backs bent and their hands bled, yet they could barely feed their children. And when they cried out for mercy, they were told to pray not to the Creator of the heavens and earth, but to carved stones. Yes, stones. Lifeless, speechless idols, chiseled by their own hands. The irony was cruel. They sculpted their gods in the morning and bowed to them by evening. These statues had eyes that couldn't see, ears that couldn't hear, and mouths that couldn't speak. Yet the people brought them offerings, slaughtered animals before them, and begged them for rain, for health, for justice. The idols gave nothing in return. How could they? They were nothing. But the king insisted. It was the religion of the forefathers, he declared. To abandon these gods would bring disaster upon the land. So fear and tradition kept the people chained not just to the king's oppressive taxes, but to a spiritual slavery far more degrading. They worshipped what they themselves had created, and in doing so, they forgot the one who created them. In the quiet corners of homes, you could hear the whispers of despair. Fathers who couldn't provide, mothers who couldn't protect their children. Elderly men standing before stone idols in the temples, lifting trembling hands to the sky, pleading for relief that never came. One such man stood in the temple one night, placing his last loaf of bread before a statue, hoping, praying that somehow his family's suffering would end. But the statue sat silent, cold, indifferent. This was a society drowning in ignorance, oppressed from above by a tyrant, enslaved from within by false beliefs. They needed a miracle. They needed guidance. They needed someone to wake them from this nightmare. And Allah, in His infinite mercy, was about to send them exactly that. Then, on an ordinary day that would prove to be anything but ordinary, 2 men appeared at the city gates. Dusty from travel, worn from the road, they looked like merchants seeking trade or perhaps pilgrims passing through. No one suspected that these strangers carried something far more valuable than silk or spices. They carried a message from the Creator of the universe. Allah had seen the suffering of this city. He had heard the silent prayers of the oppressed, even those misdirected to stones. And in his mercy, the mercy that reaches even the most lost of people, he sent 2 messengers to pull them from the darkness. But revolutions don't always announce themselves with trumpets. Sometimes they begin with whispers. The 2 messengers understood this. They didn't march into the city square declaring their prophethood. They didn't challenge the king on day 1 or overturn the idols in the temples. Instead, they moved quietly among the people, observing, listening, understanding. They set up a small stall in the marketplace, traded honestly, spoke gently. When they saw a beggar, they fed him. When they encountered a sick child, they stopped. And then something extraordinary happened. A woman brought her son to them, a boy who had been blind since birth. The messengers placed their hands gently on his eyes and said a simple prayer. In the name of Allah, who has power over all things. The boy blinked, once, twice. Then he screamed not in pain, but in wonder. Mother, I can see you. I can see the sky. The crowd that had gathered stood frozen in shock. Some whispered it was sorcery. Others felt something stirred deep in their hearts, something they hadn't felt in years. Hope. Words spread like wildfire. The strangers who could heal the sick, the men who spoke with a wisdom that seemed to pierce through the fog of ignorance. They didn't just cure bodies, they mended something deeper. They spoke of a God who needed no statue, no temple, no priests. A God who heard prayers without intermediaries. A God who created the sun, the moon, the very breath in their lungs. Their words were simple but devastating to the foundations of the city's false religion. Why do you worship what you carve with your own hands? They would ask. Can your idols give you children? Can they send rain? Can they heal your sick? The questions hung in the air like arrows finding their mark. Slowly, carefully, people began to listen. A merchant here, a farmer there. In the privacy of their homes, away from the eyes of the king's spies, they began to whisper the truth to one another. There is only one God, no partners, no statues, just Him. But light always casts shadows, and wherever truth spreads, envy follows close behind. The corrupt merchants, those who profited from the temple offerings and the king's patronage, watched with growing alarm. These 2 strangers were dangerous, not because they were violent, but because they were convincing. They were unraveling the very fabric that held the system of oppression together.
Silence them, or we lose everything.
In dark corners of expensive homes, the elite began to plot. Something had to be done. These men had to be stopped before the entire city turned away from the gods, and more importantly, away from the prophets those gods generated. The trap was being set, and the messengers, focused on their divine mission, had no idea what was coming. Allah sees what human eyes cannot. He knew the hearts of the merchants were hardening. He knew the whispers in the palace were growing louder. And he knew that 2 messengers, no matter how sincere, would soon face a storm they couldn't weather alone. So he sent reinforcement. The 3rd messenger arrived not with fanfare, but with calculated precision. Unlike his brothers who worked among the poor and the sick, this man had a different assignment. He was educated, eloquent, and carried himself with the bearing of nobility. He didn't head to the marketplace, he headed straight for the palace. Within weeks, he had done the impossible. He'd earned the trust of the king's inner circle. His advice on trade routes proved invaluable. His insights on governance seemed almost prophetic. The king's advisors praised him. The court welcomed him. He sat in their councils, ate at their tables, and listened to their schemes. All the while, he was waiting, watching, preparing for the moment when he would reveal his true purpose. This wasn't deception, it was strategy. Sometimes the truth needs a door before it can enter a locked room, and the palace doors were locked tight. Meanwhile, the first 2 messengers had grown bolder. They no longer whispered in homes. They stood in the marketplace and declared openly, "Abandon these lifeless idols. They cannot help you or harm you. Worship the one who created the heavens and the earth." Their voices rang through the streets. Some people stopped and listened, others covered their ears and hurried past, but no one could ignore them anymore. The tension in the city became unbearable. It was like a rope pulled tight from both ends, ready to snap. On one side, the messengers and their growing number of secret followers. On the other, the merchants, the priests, and the king's enforcers, all watching, all waiting for an excuse to strike. That excuse came sooner than expected. A merchant, one of the wealthiest in the city, called a secret meeting in his lavish home. The room was thick with incense and thicker with greed. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice dripping with false concern, "I'm a man who honors the gods of our fathers. I make my offerings. I respect tradition. But these two strangers," he paused for effect, "have any of you ever seen them bow before our gods? Have they ever brought a single offering to the temple?" The room fell silent. It was true. The messengers had never once participated in the city's idol worship. Another merchant leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. "That's not just disrespect, that's blasphemy. And blasphemy is a threat to our entire way of life." "Then we agree," the first merchant said with a satisfied smile. "We go to the king tonight." As the conspirators left to poison the king's ear, none of them noticed the well-dressed man in the corner, the third messenger, who had heard every word. He didn't panic. He didn't run to warn his brothers. He simply closed his eyes and made a silent prayer. The plan was unfolding exactly as Allah had willed it. By morning, the king's guards would come for the two messengers, and when they did, the third messenger would be ready to play his part. The confrontation that would change everything was about to begin. The merchants arrived at the palace just after sunset, when the king was in his usual state, half drunk on wine, fully drunk on power. They knew this was the perfect time. A sober king might ask questions. A drunk king only wanted enemies to crush. They bowed low, their faces masks of false loyalty. "Your Majesty," the lead merchant began, his voice trembling with manufactured concern, "we come with heavy hearts, bearing news that threatens the very foundation of your kingdom." The king leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Speak." "These two strangers who have been wandering our streets, they're not merely travelers, they're insurgents, revolutionaries. They stand in the marketplace and tell the people to abandon the gods. Your gods, the gods of your fathers and grandfathers." He paused, letting the accusation sink in. "They say these sacred idols are powerless. They mock our traditions. They're turning the people against everything we hold sacred." Another merchant chimed in, adding fuel to the fire. "And Your Majesty, need we remind you, if the people stop believing in the gods, they'll stop fearing them. And if they stop fearing the gods, they'll stop fearing authority." The trap was brilliant. They weren't just accusing the messengers of blasphemy, they were planting the seed that this was about the king's power. And nothing terrified a tyrant more than the thought of losing control. The king slammed his goblet down, wine splashing across the marble floor. "How dare they? Who do these peasants think they are, coming into my city, insulting my gods?" His face flushed crimson with rage. "Guards, bring them to me, now. Throw them in the deepest dungeon. I want them to understand what happens to those who challenge the divine order." Before the night was over, soldiers stormed through the marketplace. The two messengers didn't resist. They didn't run. When the guards seized them and bound their wrists with heavy chains, they simply looked at each other with a calm that unnerved even their captors. They knew this moment was coming. They'd been prepared for it since the day they entered this city. As they were dragged through the streets toward the palace dungeons, people watched from windows and doorways. Some wept, others looked away in shame. A few shouted insults, emboldened by the presence of the king's men. But one man watched differently. His name was Habib al-Najjar, and he lived on the outskirts of the city, far from the center of power and corruption. He was a simple man, a carpenter, a father, a believer. Unlike the others who hid their faith out of fear, Habib had been quietly following the messengers from the beginning. He'd listened to their words. He'd witnessed their miracles. And most importantly, he'd submitted his heart to the one true God. Now, standing in the shadows of a narrow alley, Habib watched the messengers being hauled away like criminals. His heart pounded in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to do something, to speak up, to defend them. But he held back, not out of cowardice, out of wisdom. He knew that charging into the palace now would accomplish nothing except getting himself killed alongside them. No, he would wait, he would watch, and when the moment came when they needed him most, he would step forward. Back in the palace, the third messenger sat among the king's advisors, his face carefully neutral. He'd heard everything, the arrest, the charges, the king's fury. And now, sitting in that room of vipers, he made his decision. The time for waiting was over. The throne room was packed. Nobles, merchants, priests, soldiers, everyone who mattered in the city had been summoned to witness what the king promised would be entertainment. The two messengers were brought in, still in chains, their clothes torn and stained from days in the dungeon, but their eyes still burned with an unshakable conviction that made even the guards uncomfortable. The king lounged on his throne, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "So," he began, his voice dripping with mockery, "you claim to worship a God so powerful that he needs no statue, no temple, no image. A God we cannot see." He laughed, and his courtiers laughed with him, a chorus of hollow sycophants. "Tell me, how can we worship what we cannot see? How can we trust what we cannot touch?" One of the messengers stepped forward as far as his chains would allow. His voice was steady, calm, fearless. "Your Majesty, you cannot see the wind, yet you feel its power. You cannot touch your own soul, yet you know it exists. Allah is beyond your sight, but his signs are everywhere, in the sun that rises, in the rain that falls, in the very breath you take." The king's smile faded slightly. He hadn't expected such composure. "Fine words," he spat. "But words are cheap. Your God, if he exists, should be able to do what our gods do. Prove it. Perform a miracle, right here, right now." He snapped his fingers, and guards dragged forward a man from the edge of the room. The man's eyes were clouded with white, blind from birth, well known in the city as a beggar who sat by the temple gates. The king gestured toward him with theatrical flourish. "Heal him. Let's see your invisible God work." The second messenger looked at the blind man with compassion. He placed his hand gently on the man's shoulder and raised his other hand toward the heavens. "Bismillah, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, who has power over all things." Then he touched the man's eyes. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The courtiers began to snicker. But then, the blind man gasped. His hands flew to his face. He blinked once, twice, 3 times. And then he screamed, not in pain, but in overwhelming joy. "I can see. By the gods, no. No, by Allah. I can see." He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, staring at his own hands, as if seeing them for the first time, because he was. The throne room fell into absolute silence. You could hear the torches crackling on the walls. No one moved, no one breathed. Then, a voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Your Majesty." It was the king's trusted advisor, the third messenger rising from his seat among the court, every head turned toward him. "You've seen what their God can do. Now, I have a simple request." He walked slowly toward the center of the room, his voice calm but commanding. "Call upon your gods, ask them to do the same. Surely if they are real, they can match this miracle." The king's face went pale, then red. His hands gripped the armrests of his throne until his knuckles turned white. He knew. Everyone in that room knew. The statues in the temples couldn't do anything. They never had. "The gods," the king stammered, "the gods work in mysterious ways. They don't perform tricks on command like street magicians." "Then they are not gods. the third messenger declared, his voice now echoing through the chamber. "And I will tell you something else, Your Majesty. I am not merely your advisor. I am the third messenger sent by Allah to this city. I came to you, worked among you, earned your trust not to deceive you, but to show you that truth doesn't need force. It needs only to be witnessed." He turned to address the entire court, his voice rising with righteous conviction. "Abandon these lifeless idols. Worship Allah alone, who created you, who sustains you, who will judge you. He is the only one worthy of your devotion." The king shot to his feet, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. "Enough!" His roar shook the rafters. You dare betray me like this. I welcomed you. I trusted you." He pointed a shaking finger at the guards. "Take them, all three of them. Drag them to the public square. Let the people deal with these blasphemers. Let them see what happens to those who reject the gods of our fathers." As the guards seized the third messenger and led all three toward the doors, the king shouted after them, his voice cracking with fury, and something else, something that sounded almost like fear. "You will die for this, all of you." The messengers walked out with their heads held high, ready for whatever came next. The public square had transformed into something demonic. Thousands of people crammed into every available space, their faces twisted with manufactured rage. The merchants had done their work well, spreading rumors, stoking fears, turning neighbors into a mob. "Death to the blasphemers," they chanted. "Protect our gods. Protect our traditions." The three messengers stood on a raised platform, still bound in chains, surrounded by guards. Below them, the sea of angry faces surged and roared like a storm. Some threw stones that clattered against the wooden platform, others waved fists and screamed threats. This was what hatred looked like when it became collective, when individual conscience dissolved into the madness of the crowd. From the edge of the square, Habib al-Najjar watched, his heart hammered against his ribs. Every muscle in his body told him to run, to hide, to protect his family. He had a wife, children, a quiet life on the outskirts of town. What could one carpenter do against thousands? But then he looked at the messengers, men who had healed the sick, fed the hungry, spoken nothing but truth, and he couldn't stay silent anymore. Some moments demand more than survival. Some moments demand witness. Habib began pushing through the crowd. People shoved back, cursed at him, but he kept moving. His voice started small, then grew louder. "Wait, listen, you're making a mistake." The crowd near him turned, annoyed at the interruption. Who is this fool? But Habib kept walking, kept pushing, until he stood at the front, facing the entire city. His voice rang out across the square, clear and unafraid. "O my people, follow the messengers. Follow those who ask you for no payment, who want nothing from you but your guidance. They don't seek your wealth or your positions. They seek only to save you from error." Angry voices tried to drown him out, but Habib raised his hands and continued, his voice breaking with passion. "And why should I not worship the one who created me? The one to whom you will all return, whether you believe it or not. Think, when you die, will these stone idols answer for you? Will they speak on your behalf?" Someone from the crowd screamed, "Traitor, you've betrayed the gods of your fathers." Habib turned toward the voice, his eyes blazing. "Should I take other gods besides him? If the most merciful, Allah, intends any harm for me, can their intercession help me at all? Can they save me?" His voice cracked with the weight of truth. "They cannot save themselves. How can they save me?" The crowd fell into a moment of terrible silence, because everyone there deep down knew he was right. They'd seen the blind man healed. They'd heard the king's own advisor confess the truth. But admitting it would mean abandoning everything, their traditions, their pride, their entire way of life. And pride is a poison, stronger than any truth. "He mocks our gods," someone shouted, and the spell broke. The mob surged forward like a wave. Habib didn't run. He stood his ground, still speaking even as the first stone struck his shoulder. "I pray Allah guides you. You don't understand what you're doing." More stones flew. One hit his head, and blood ran down his face. He stumbled but didn't fall. His voice grew weaker, but his message remained strong. "My Lord, forgive them." The stones came faster now, from every direction. Habib fell to his knees, then to the ground. The mob surrounded him, a circle of rage and fear disguised as righteousness. They killed him there in the street, in front of the messengers he'd tried to defend. And then something miraculous happened. As Habib's soul departed his battered body, he didn't descend into darkness, he ascended into light. Allah, in his infinite mercy, granted him immediate entry into paradise. No waiting, no judgment, just pure, instant reward. Habib opened his eyes, not his earthly eyes, but his soul's eyes, and saw gardens more beautiful than anything he'd imagined. Rivers flowing beneath trees of unimaginable splendor. Peace, joy, the pleasure of Allah himself. And in that moment of overwhelming bliss, his first thought wasn't about himself, it was about his people. The Quran records his words, "I wish my people knew what my Lord has forgiven me and how he has honored me." Even in paradise, Habib's heart ached for those who'd killed him, not with anger, with love, with hope that somehow they might still be saved. But they wouldn't be. Back on earth, the mob erupted in cheers. They'd done it. They'd silenced the troublemaker, dealt with the blasphemers, protected their way of life. The king's soldiers dragged the three messengers away to their execution, and the crowd dispersed, satisfied. Some went to the temples to make offerings, thanking their stone gods for the victory. Others returned to the taverns, celebrating with wine and laughter. The merchants counted their profits, relieved that the threat to their comfortable corruption had been eliminated. Life returned to normal. The tyrant sat on his throne, the idols remained in their temples. The oppression continued as it always had. They thought they had won. But high above them, beyond the clouds they could see and the heavens they couldn't imagine, divine justice was already in motion. This place that had received not one, not two, but three messengers, and responded with violence and the killing of the man who defended them. He had given them miracles. He had given them truth. He had given them every opportunity to turn back from their path of destruction. They had chosen violence instead. And so, the judgment came. The Quran tells us with chilling simplicity, "We did not send down upon his people after him any soldiers from the heaven, nor would we have done so." It was not but one shout, and immediately they were extinguished. No armies of angels descending with swords, no floods like the time of Noah, no fire raining from the sky like Sodom. This city didn't deserve such elaborate punishment. They were beneath that. A single scream would suffice. Angel Jibril alayhi salam, the same angel who brought revelations to prophets, who announced the birth of Isa alayhi salam, who would one day bring the Quran to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, received a simple command. He descended to the edge of the city, took the tip of his mighty wing, and released one divine scream. It happened in an instant. In the palace, the king was mid-sentence, boasting to his courtiers about crushing the rebellion, when his voice simply stopped. His heart stopped beating. His lungs stopped breathing. He froze like a statue, becoming in death what he'd worshipped in life. In the marketplace, a merchant was laughing, recounting how they'd stoned the fool who defended the strangers. The laugh died in his throat, literally. He stood there, mouth open, eyes vacant, a monument to interrupted mockery. In the temples, priests were burning incense before their idols. The smoke stopped rising, the priests stopped moving, everything stopped. Mothers reaching for their children, soldiers mid-stride, traders mid-bargain. Every single person in that city, men, women, young, old, rich, poor, all of them extinguished like candles in a storm. No screams, no chance to repent, No final prayers, just silence. The city that had been alive with celebration moments before became a graveyard frozen in time. Bodies stood where they'd been standing, sat where they'd been sitting, completely still. They became exactly like the idols they'd worshipped, lifeless stone, cold, voiceless, powerless. And Allah says in the Quran, reflecting on this moment, "What regret there is for the servants, there does not come to them a messenger except that they used to ridicule him." Regret. But whose regret? Not Allah's. He had sent them guidance, not the messengers they had delivered the message. The regret belonged to them, those servants who had every chance and threw it away. But by the time they felt that regret, it was too late. The door of mercy had closed. The city that rejected 3 messengers of Allah and killed the man who defended them was erased. Not slowly, not gradually. In one breath, one divine scream, it was over. A civilization gone, a people extinguished. A warning preserved in the Quran for all time. And somewhere in paradise, Habib al-Najjar, the simple carpenter who gave everything for truth, still wished they had listened. This is the story of Ashab al-Qaryah, the people of the town, a warning preserved in Surah Yasin for all of humanity. They were given messengers, they were shown miracles, they were called to truth. But pride, arrogance, and blind following of tradition led them to destruction. And when Allah's punishment came, it was swift, final, and absolute. May Allah guide us to recognize the truth when it comes to us. May He protect us from arrogance and save us from the fate of those who reject His messengers. Subhanallah walhamdulillah wa la ilaha illallah wallahu akbar. If this story moved you, share it. The lessons of the Quran are not just history, they are warnings for today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.